I'm going to go over the one converter that I would invest in if I could only have one converter for the rest of my days, as difficult as that is to do. And I'm going to explain to you why you might want to look into converters if it's not something you've already looked into or understand. First and foremost, converters are not going to be important for everyone, especially if you have an interface already. So if you do have an interface you're happy with and all the work you're doing is coming out the way you like it, I wouldn't say it's essential to be looking into converters that are dedicated, more expensive, and whatever. On the other hand, if you are a mastering engineer, if you're a mixing engineer, if you have a studio business like myself, and you really need to be competitive, have extremely high quality output, I definitely recommend you looking into the converter game, because it's what's going to help you be a little bit more competitive, have a little bit higher quality and detail and edge over your competition. After years of spending exorbitant amounts of money on gear, especially monitors, mics, and converters, I'm really embarrassed to say that I've lost ridiculous amounts of money doing so, but I've also learned so much about converters, and I know for a fact they make a big difference in your process if you have a really good one. Converters originally were created to be able to work digitally on music and be able to have that digital music leave our computers and be workable on outboard gear or a console. When you go to a major studio, consoles that you might see, like those big silver tables with all the knobs and stuff, we all know what it is, they require lots of I/O that way in order for you to be able to get the signal out of your computer, maybe 128 tracks into a console, and then the console, usually what people will do is they'll print the console mix back into their DAW or work on the console, and then they'll sum it down to a stereo track or buses which they can print back into their DAW also. All of this requires a lot of conversion power. Now, most of us don't have consoles, so why would a converter really matter to us at home? Well, if you do use outboard gear, if you do have analog speakers, if you do have an attention to detail and you want the highest amount of clarity and quality, converters are going to help maximize all the tools you do have at your studio. And that's why I have dedicated converters. That's why I use them. And there's also a concept called clipping your converter, which is a little bit more advanced, but it's something we're going to get to later in the video, and is definitely a consideration if that's something that you're interested in doing, especially as a mastering engineer. First and foremost, when it comes to converters, what should you be looking for your studio? Assuming you don't have a huge console and you haven't spent $200,000 on a ridiculous amount of outboard gear, I know that most people would only require 4 outs and 2 ins for a dedicated converter if they already have an interface. The reason why I believe that is because the most important thing, in my opinion, for anybody who has a home studio or a smaller studio or a professional studio that doesn't have a ton of gear, the most important thing is your mix bus and your master bus. The next most important thing, that's actually probably more important than the mix bus and master bus, is hearing things correctly. So can you use that converter to connect to your speakers and do your loop back on your mix bus or your master bus at the same time? Or is there only 2 outs and 2 ins, so you have to choose one or the other? I don't like to compromise that way. So in order to make sure I can hear stuff through my speakers if I have analog speakers, and in order to make sure I can do my mix bus round trip, I need 4 outs, 2 going to my speakers and 2 feeding my outboard mix bus, and then 2 ins that feed my mix bus back into my computer. That's the first consideration, but something that a lot of people don't know about the converters that they make nowadays is that they have a ton of features now. Interfaces have always had a lot of features, but converters that are called converters, like that where we see the ADDA on the name of the product, they rarely have a ton of features that you have inside of the box. That changed roughly 8 to 10 years ago with certain products coming out and really pushing the limit of what converters can do on their own. Improving factors like headphone amps, improving DAC filter options, improving factors like DSP. This has all been more recent in the converters that have come out. And because of that, there are so many things to consider now when purchasing a modern converter. Assuming that you don't have that 128 I/O that you need to worry about in your console, something that I would highly recommend, I've already talked about it on this channel, is the RME ADI 2.4. I always support and stand by this device because it has tremendously transparent conversion. It sounds really good. You have so much control. It is very complex to learn, but it has the 4 outs, 2 ins, a tremendous headphone amp, really stellar playback, DAC, and A to D quality that I haven't even heard on any other converter that isn't below, I want to say, the $10,000, maybe $12,000 price range. And it can travel with you. It's so small, you can take it with you wherever you got to go, which is amazing, and I love that. Now, if you're not a fan of reading books and learning all the details that come along with having an Army ADI, I definitely think you might be interested in the Lynx Hilo. The Lynx Hilo is a staple for good reason. It sounds amazing. It sounds really good. It sounds very similar to the Army ADI. The ADI maybe sounds a little bit more open, dare I say. I don't know. You have more control with those filters, so you can get different stuff out of the ADI compared to the options you have filter-wise on the Lynx Hilo. But the Hilo sounds amazing, and it also has a really good AES out on it directly in the unit. You don't need to plug anything onto it if you have mastering speakers, and it's a really, really good quality unit as well. Also small enough to travel with, and one that people, and mastering engineers in particular, have trusted for a long time to deliver the quality that we all hear. One of my favorite mastering engineers, actually my favorite mastering engineer, Chris Athens, has been using a Lynx Hilo for quite a while. He's been supporting Lynx that way, and that's obviously one of his few converters. He has a number of converters. He also uses a Weiss, which I also fully support. But that would be another consideration for you if you're looking for one that is really, really good and a little bit simpler to use than the Army ADI with less features. Now, if you're somebody who really cares about clipping your converters, you're not really going to be able to do that successfully with the RME or the Hilo. They aren't programmed that way. They're not designed to be clipped. They don't have a clipping circuit inside of them that you can push a little bit harder, and they also don't have overkill, so you can't soft clip them either. And this limits you a little bit if you really care about that. And that kind of changes the scope of the conversation entirely. That brings you into the Burrow conversation. That brings you into the Lavry conversation. And these converters that are used for clipping are significantly more expensive than the converters that are not used for them, with exception to Prism stuff. That said, I'm not necessarily super gung-ho about clipping the Prism Lyra or clipping the Prism Titan or that lineup of interfaces, because the quality of the conversion in those devices doesn't necessarily stack up to what I would like them to. So if you do have the ability to spend the kind of money that's required to get a good converter for clipping, there are really only a couple options to go with, and that would be, in my opinion, that could really give you the sound that you want, unless you do more folk stuff, which I can talk about after. There's only really a few that can do all genres, all sounds, all qualities, are transparent enough and have a really good flavor to them at the same time, and that would be the Prism Dream. Clipping that does sound good. The Lavry, which probably has the best quality for clipping stuff in my opinion, and the Weiss ADC2. That's also a tremendous option for clipping. It handles it really well. I think it's a little bit underrated as a clipping converter, but that said, they're so expensive. I do not own any of these three converters. I've had to use them out and about, especially in studios that have consoles. Like I mentioned earlier, studios that have consoles will tend to have these kinds of converters, especially the mixed stream. Sorry, not the mixed stream at all. The Dream, the Prism Dream. The Prism Dream is able to have so much I/O that a lot of studios do enjoy using it. Now, all that said, it definitely is not necessary to be going in that direction, especially if you don't really know what you're doing and know for sure that having a clipping converter is going to be really important to your workflow. For me, I think that it's much easier to just keep the clipping in the box, especially if you're doing a lot of other outboard processing on your mix bus and you have other things going on. Use your T-Rax plugin. Use your Newfangle Saturate, especially T-Rax actually. I do like the way that sounds. Use your Gold Clip. Use whatever clippers that you want, K-Clip even, and get the sound that you're looking for in the box on your mixing, on your masters, and this will help you achieve that sound without having to go with a converter to go and clip your stuff, because it doesn't always make sense to do that. It's just really expensive and you just really got to know what you're doing. So to backtrack, I really think it's hard. It's very hard, especially in the price range and for all the features that come with this device, to beat the Army ADI 2.4 Pro SE as the only converter that I would take and use for the rest of my days as an audio engineer and as a producer. It's a very pleasing sound. It's very clear, detailed, transparent, and has all of the things that you could possibly need to make the best and highest quality sounding music with your mix bus, with your analog gear. The DAC is fantastic. The ADC is fantastic. Everything is really good in that unit. And I know I've done another review on it earlier. I highly recommend you check that one out if you're curious about a more in-depth review on the Army ADI 2.4 Pro SE. This concludes my video today. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll catch you guys soon. Ciao.